Welcome to the ultimate age of the geek, where we take deep dives into TV and film and take a look at these projects through nerd vision goggles. We are your hosts. I'm Quiggs, and this is Dave.
Hello there.
We're talking about The Two Towers today. Dave, what did you think about this movie?
I was just blown away by the large-scale battles. The blend of miniatures, CG, and practical effects and men in costumes. The one battle specifically. I don't know. I felt like I came in with really fresh eyes and I just was like blown away all over again.
The first one is pretty large scale too. I mean, they travel a lot.
They do travel a lot. It's really fellowship focused, right? This one, the fellowship is all split up and they're all doing their own things. The whole Hunter's story with Rohan and Helm's Deep is my favorite part of the movie. Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, their whole story, their interactions, the actors, like everything about them is just so good in this movie. Merry and Pippin really love their stuff.
They have some important stuff to do.
They have important stuff to do, but it's not a lot. And so
Right.
They don't spend a lot of time on it.
You spend the majority of your time with, like you said, the Hunter party. You get a lot with Frodo and Sam too, which is cool.
I will say it's such a nitpicky negative. I felt at times like some of the Frodo and Sam stuff.
They definitely were padding. My main takeaways from this movie is, number one, the music score I feel like is just amped up to beyond 11.
I'm not a big music person, so it takes a lot for me to really take note of the music, but I took note of the music in this movie.
All of the scenes that take place in Rohan are just gorgeous. And then I also really liked the themes of hope, perseverance, and grace that I felt were pretty prominent throughout the film. We can get into the synopsis now, I feel like.
The three hunters, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, continue their path to free Merry and Pippin from the Uruk-hai who kidnapped them. They come across riders from Rohan, banished for remaining loyal to the people. The hunters find the trail of the hobbits, which lead them to Gandalf. Gandalf travels with them to the king of Rohan, who is under Saruman's control. Gandalf frees him, and after news of an incoming invasion, the king takes his people with the three hunters to Helm's Deep, where they will make their final stand, while Gandalf rides out to find the cavalry. Meanwhile, Merry and Pippin, having escaped the orc clutches, discover the Ents, which are living tree-like creatures that tend to the forest. After a long and arduous process, they are disheartened by the decision of the Ents to not take part in the war. At the same time, Frodo and Sam continue their trek to Mordor. They find Gollum and manage to get him to trust them. He guides them to Mordor, deciding the Black Gate is too heavily guarded, though. Gollum agrees to take them on a dangerous but secret path into Mordor. However, before he can do that, they are captured by men of Gondor and meet Faramir, Boromir's brother. The men take them to the city of Osgiliath, outside of Minas Tirith, where Faramir and Boromir's father rules Gondor. After an encounter with the Ringwraiths and a speech by Sam, Faramir decides to let them leave on their journey to destroy the ring. Gollum, feeling betrayed by his captivity, decides to betray Frodo and Sam. Helm's Deep, meanwhile, is under siege by Saruman's forces, and although they are putting up a valiant fight, the orcs' numbers are too great. The outer wall has been breached, and they are almost upon the king and the three hunters. They ride out at dawn just as Gandalf arrives, and the two groups together drive the orcs to flee. Finally, Merry and Pippin manipulate Treebeard and the Ents to witness Saruman's destruction, and out of anger, they attack and destroy Isengard, with only the tower remaining.
There are a few big things that happen in this movie, but when you say it concisely like that, it almost feels like not a ton happens.
I know it seems like this is a really concise plot, but this movie's 4 hours long. There's a lot of stuff from the extended edition that I really appreciate being there. I think I still like Fellowship better.
It's a little easier to follow.
Legolas and Gimli are so much better in this movie.
Legolas and Gimli have more to do. Merry and Pippin have more to do.
You know, they start out captured by the orcs, pretty quickly manage to get free of them in the chaos of the men of Rohan attacking. They come across Treebeard. The CGI on the Ents was hit or miss for me. I think Treebeard looks good. All the other Ents are pretty bad.
The far shots with them in the meeting, in the Entmoot, those are fine. But whenever they have any up close, maybe Treebeard in the foreground and the other Ents in the background,
Yeah,
they just look goofy.
they do look really goofy.
But I thought it was cool how Gandalf, he kind of alludes to Merry and Pippin being the only ones who could move the Ents so towards war with Isengard. Like he
Yeah.
says like they have a very important role that only they can do.
It's really interesting and fun to me that like Gandalf loves hobbits and has so much faith in them. He knows that the enemy, they just completely underestimate the hobbits.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely.
All of their plans are based on what they know of men and elves and dwarves. But Gandalf knows the hobbits. We see that, and also it's possible that he was given some kind of knowledge, right? And I think it's more clear in the books that this happens. He is kind of a different person when he returns.
Mm-hmm. He has to be reminded of his name.
But I remember like it being a little bit more permanent of a change. Like he doesn't just start acting like the old Gandalf again.
Yeah. It would have been jarring in a film to just say, hey, here's the same actor, but he's a totally different person now.
I wonder if when he returned as the new Saruman, if he was given some knowledge about what would have happened or something, you know? But even if he wasn't, he knows that Merry and Pippin are capable of convincing them, you know? And they do. Saruman has tens of thousands of orcs. He gets undone by two little hobbits. It's just so gratifying to watch. I love some of the moments we get from Merry and Pippin. The whole thing about like drinking the water and them and like their conversation about being what 3-6. I'm 3-7. Also the end when they find the pipe weed and the food.
I love how they go through all of this epic stuff and they're just kind of, for the most part, besides how they direct the Ents towards revenge of the forest or avenging the forest, besides all of that epic stuff, they're just kind of along for the ride and really enjoying themselves. And then they find the storeroom with the pipe weed. All of a sudden they just turn into like the Harold and Kumar of Middle Earth. Like it's phenomenal. Amidst all the chaos and craziness, they can still find time to just relax.
It occurred to me somewhere in this movie that they're English and very obviously are using their English accents. And Sam and Frodo are American and are definitely not using British accents. I mean, they're changing how they talk to a degree, right? But they're definitively not using English accents. I don't think I ever really thought or noticed that before this watch through, where I'm watching with like a really critical eye.
Yeah, I knew they just sounded completely different, but that's really funny.
I was in middle school when these movies came out. Merry and Pippin were like my favorite in the first one. And then Legolas and Gimli were like maybe up there. They're just so much fun, but they still have a lot of heart. It's not like they're just a joke. They're the tension relief, right? I definitely believe, even in the most dramatic of movies, you need some amount of humor. And the reason for that is you need something to relieve the tension. As everything is building up, you need something to kind of just relieve some of that pressure. That's just a little bit of comedy, right? Like I think of The Dark Knight and just how intense that movie is. One of my favorite moments from that movie that is this tension relief is when the guy goes to Morgan Freeman's character and is like, I know who Bruce Wayne is, etc. And he's like, you are telling me that your client, one of the richest, most powerful men, secretly at night dresses up as a bat and beats criminals to a pulp with his bare hands, and your plan is to blackmail him? Because it's such a tense moment. It's an amazing line, and it's a momentary laugh that relieves that tension and lets you kind of like take a breath. And a lot of the times that was Merry and Pippin in this movie. And that's so important.
Merry and Pippin, Sam and Frodo, and the Hunters. I feel like they all had their own tension relief moments because
True.
And they say it a lot too, in addition to showing it, that there is just so much against them. The odds are against them. The enemy keeps building their army. Things are just not working out. The most tension is on the Hunters, but the overall safety and security of the world rests in Frodo and Sam's hands. So their story just feels weightier. And you really see the despair with them.
And that's why you need those Merry and Pippin moments to let you breathe. I think the Frodo and Sam story takes a little too much time. I love the way that Gollum is integrated into the story.
Yeah.
The Frodo and Sam dynamic, it's perfect. Sean Astin is phenomenal. And Andy Serkis as Gollum, oh my gosh. I think I could talk for an hour about how amazing the scene where he's arguing with himself is.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal. I remember watching that for the first time and just everyone laughing, like not laughing as in like it's this super humorous thing, right? It's just so ridiculous, but like so well done.
They really nailed that dichotomy between like his two personalities. Smeagol with his innocence, and then you've got Gollum with the greediness and just all of the evil that the ring has kind of driven into him over the years. And it's really cool how they play that dichotomy throughout the whole film once he shows up.
The introduction of him and how he basically is like, oh, I'll serve Frodo because Frodo has the ring. Frodo's the master, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like something Sam doesn't understand in these moments is that Frodo is sitting there going, this is me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is what I can become. I need to believe in Gollum. I need to believe that Gollum can be redeemed because if he can't, if everything Sam says about Gollum is true, then I can't be redeemed.
There's where that theme of grace kind of plays into effect because Frodo needs to hold on to that. He needs to have grace for Gollum. And he shows Sam, because Sam towards the end then shows some grace towards Gollum as well and starts to feel like he is actually a somewhat valued member and actually does care for them. Unfortunately, right at the time where he's kind of turning his thoughts again, Sam is kind of like hope embodied, but then Gollum enters the picture and he loses sight of that a little bit and gets angry almost at Frodo having grace for this just terribly deformed creature.
That whole scene, though, that scene blows me away. One, the CGI holds up in that scene. The animators were amazing. Andy Serkis is just a genius. This is what made him like, oh, the mocap guy, you know? Early on, there's when they first team up, there's one part with the rabbits. He gets in Sam's face and it's just like, you wants them, you know, raw and
Right.
whatever. And all I could think was, how is Sean Astin not laughing right now?
Right.
Because what is happening right now is a man who's, I think, a good bit older than him in a skin tight, dot covered suit is literally like inches from his face.
Talking to him in a really weird voice.
I don't know how you could get through that. I would be laughing like crazy, but you know,
dude,
I'm not an actor.
It's moments like that that I think the same thing, and I think I could never make it as an actor. There's two scenes where he's talking to himself, and the first scene is where Smeagol side of him kind of abolishes the Gollum side of him.
I just want to mention several other things that I noticed about that scene. All the facial expressions, those were all him, and the voice, right? The difference between Gollum and Smeagol and just how he like brings that voice up. Oh my gosh, it's phenomenal. So like there's that stuff, right? That's always talked about. But some other things I wanted to mention that I feel like is not really mentioned here is the filmmaking, the way that they choose the camera angles. There's a little bit of camera movement, just a small amount, and the camera angles they choose make you really feel like it's two different people talking to each other. I forget which is which, but every time one of them's talking, the camera is on the left side of their face and they're looking off to the right side of the screen.
Right.
And every time it's the other one, it's on the right side of their face and they're looking to the left side of the screen.
Did you catch how they don't do that at first? So they kind of ease into it once they really start kind of arguing and bickering amongst each other. Then it really starts doing it. It just kind of furthers that split. It's really cool.
Yeah. So like the lead into it, the gradual pull out from it. One of my favorite scenes from the whole movie.
I also really, really liked the return of Gollum. When Faramir has captured them, he's interrogated Smeagol, and Smeagol loses it. He cracks again. And Gollum comes in, turns him again.
This time we don't do the camera thing.
No.
It's just from Faramir's perspective of watching this thing descend into madness.
Yeah, and it's so great how it'll focus on Gollum, and then it'll focus back on Faramir, and you just see this kind of disbelief and
fear.
yeah, and then when he asks him, what did he take from you? And then Gollum turns around and yells at him, like screams at him, "My precious!" Like that echoing thing.
Yeah.
That was cool too.
I know it riles people up for me to say this. We would never have Gollum if it wasn't for Jar Jar Binks.
Huh. I mean, I guess, yeah. I guess that's fair.
The very first motion capture character was Jar Jar Binks. I know how much people hate the prequel, so I love to.
Jar Jar actually did serve a purpose.
Yes, Jar Jar served a purpose.
Just not in the movies.
They introduced technology that literally didn't exist before them and allowed for so many, quite frankly, better movies
Yes.
to make use of them, like this.
I'm glad you specified that they were game changers technologically and not in dialogue or script writing.
I always like to be like, we wouldn't have had Gollum if it wasn't for Jar Jar Binks, because it riles people up.
I didn't know that Jar Jar Binks was the first mocap. That's interesting.
I'm about 90% certain of that.
But I just have two really, really quick notes on Faramir. I like how in the extended edition they kind of do a flashback. So we get a little bit more of Boromir.
I love flashbacks. To see the dynamic in Faramir and Boromir's brotherly bond, but also with their father and the whole family dynamic, and to understand that Boromir was sent to the council of Elrond with the express purpose of bringing the ring to Gondor. And I think he knew that it was wrong, but between the influence of the ring and that his father was expecting him to bring it to Gondor, that was what he was working for the whole time, and that's why he failed to resist.
Boromir was very duty driven, and the corruption of the ring, which took hold of that, just made it 10 times worse, 100 times worse.
And I like Faramir a lot, and just the struggle he has.
So in the books, Faramir was completely different from Boromir in the sense that he was not even remotely tempted by the ring. So in the books, he actually tells Frodo, he refuses the ring straight away once he finds out that Frodo has it, and he says, "I would not take this thing, even if it lay by the highway. Would I not take it?" And sends the hobbits on their way eventually. But I mean, so that's the one thing that and it's a very minor change, very nitpicky, because eventually in the movie, Faramir does let them go too. The first few times that I watched this, I was like, he's just essentially Boromir 2.0. Gets tempted the same way, but then he does send Frodo off.
Notice, though, in the movie, he never ever tries to take the ring from Frodo. Like, Boromir actually tried to take the ring. Faramir never tried to actually take the ring. He was like, "Oh, I'm gonna take you to my father." Mm-hmm. Never once does he attempt to take it from Frodo.
There is that scene where he draws his sword and on the sword is the chain, and Frodo starts to kind of freak out, and Sam jumps in between them.
That's when he reveals that he found out about it, right?
Yeah, but you can hear the ring kind of speaking in the black speech or whatever.
I didn't read that as like, oh, he's tempted by it. I read it as he's discovering it.
Well, remember how in the last movie, every time Frodo offered it to somebody, it tried to worm its way into their thoughts?
It also did that when it was on the ground and Gandalf was looking at it like, what is this thing? Whenever the ring is like prominently featured, it always whispers. I don't know. He never really seemed tempted to take the ring for himself. He just was like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to bring this to my father.
The thing that stuck out to me in the book about Faramir was just that he seemed to have a greater strength of character than Boromir did. Like he does want to please his father, but at the same time, he also knows what's right and wrong. And I think that's why him and his father clash so much. Like I said, one very nitpicky thing, because eventually he does the right thing in the end.
Part of my problem with this movie is that I think it kind of like creates a little bit of unnecessary drama in order to keep the story of the hobbits to kind of be roughly where the hunters are in their ultimate path to Mordor. They needed to delay the hobbits, is what I'm saying. And this was a way to do it.
This took the place of Shelob. In the book, Shelob is introduced in the Two Towers.
Yeah.
Shelob got shunted to the third movie.
Because, again, I think they were trying to give equal screen time to Frodo and Sam. I feel like there's just not as much story to go with Frodo and Sam. They have a relatively simple journey with a few events outstanding. And so they have to kind of introduce a little extra drama here and there because the majority of the action is really from the hunters. And a lot of the Frodo story in the book, which is about an equal amount of written time, but it's a lot more of an internal struggle, which is a lot easier to express in a book.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Last thing I want to say about Frodo and Sam. Sam's speech near the end, when they're in Osgiliath, is amazing. They have all these chances to turn back, but they didn't because they're holding on to something. And Frodo says, what are we holding on to, Sam? And his response of that there's some good in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worth fighting for. Sean Astin's delivery is so amazing. And just the like fun little moment at the end too, where he's like, do you think one day that they'll tell stories about us?
Sam has been working so hard the whole movie, watching over Frodo, making sure he's safe, not just from other external threats, but safe from the ring, safe from Gollum. And Frodo kind of treats him roughly once Gollum enters the picture, just because he's dealing with his own internal struggle. And then I think that little affirmation and that little recognition and praise at the end, you can just see Sam's face light up.
I mean, even Gollum, after all these years, has a sliver of Smeagol left over, which comes out extremely in certain moments. Frodo has his moments where the ring is in control.
The hunters.
I remember in middle school watching Aragorn read the ground and tell the story about what Merry and Pippin did through the battle. And I was just like, this is the coolest man alive.
Yeah, man. Viggo Mortensen sells Aragorn so well. I wanted to be a Ranger of the North when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Forget firefighters, forget astronauts. I wanted to be one of the Dunedain.
He's the dramatic, brooding one who has this love that can't return to him, and they're destined to be apart, etc. And then you get Legolas and Gimli. They were good in Fellowship. They start with this tension, right? The elves and the dwarves don't like each other. I love the fact that what they bond over is counting their kills in battle. This is the tension relief on this end. It was still like them butting heads, right? Oh, I'm gonna get more kills than you. But because of the events and everything, it brought camaraderie.
The end of the Battle of Helm's Deep, Gimli has 43 kills and Legolas has 42 kills, right? That's like straight out of the book. I always found it kind of laughably low because Sauron specifically says when Wormtongue tells him, "My lord, there is no such army of tens of thousands." And Saruman just kind of walks out onto the balcony and he's got literally tens of thousands of Uruk-hai and orcs. So with that many attacking Helm's Deep, I find, mid 40s, early to mid 40s in kills kind of low, especially for how God mode Gimli and Legolas are, especially in like a fantasy setting.
So a couple moments of the kills that I want to bring up. When they're fighting the wargs and the warg is running after Gimli and he's like about to slice it with its axe and Legolas just shoots it right in front of him. Doesn't even give him a chance to slice. And he's just like, that one counts as mine.
Yep. I like how it falls on top of him.
Falling on top of him, and then the goblin coming up and then breaking the neck, and then that's on top of him, and then the other warg comes up and Aragorn kills it, and that's on top of it.
Yep.
That was hilarious. It's funny when the battle starts, Legolas, the archer, has 17 kills, and the first ladder finally allows a guy up and Gimli kills him and he's like 1 and Legolas 17. But then Gimli, I love how later Gimli's just standing there between two ladders and he's like 6, 7, 8, 9.
I love that shot because it zooms out and you just hear his voice echoing over the valley. It's so great.
The last moment from Two Towers with the kill counting that really, really I love at the end when Legolas 42 and Gimli's 43 and he shoots the arrow into the dead one that Gimli's sitting on and he's it twitched. He's of course it twitched. My axe is in his nervous system.
Yep, and then he just takes the axe and moves it and the whole orc twitches. Such a great scene. Yeah. I love it. Because you just had this harrowing battle where Aragorn and King Theoden literally thought they were going to ride out to their deaths.
Well, Aragorn knew Gandalf would arrive, but...
Right. But he wasn't sure if it was just going to be Gandalf or Gandalf with the Rohirrim.
Yeah.
And so they kind of ride out as one final charge. They literally say to each other, at least we'll die in glory, in the glory of battle. And then you get finally, after all is said and done, you're just kind of trying to still process literally everything that happened and some of the characters that died during that battle. And then you get that moment. It's great. I mean, and even during the battle, you get some funny things too, like how Legolas takes an orc shield and slides down a
Hmm.
whole like couple flights of steps until he like jumps off and the shield goes into an orc's chest.
The kills for Legolas, they're so wildly unrealistic. It makes me love them that much more.
Yeah.
Legolas could just do anything and somebody will die. His insane shots from arrows.
Okay, I have a question for you. And this is not a serious question. When the wall is breached and Aragorn falls, do you think Gimli jumps down mainly to save Aragorn or mainly to improve his kill count?
Probably a little bit of both.
Because as cool as Gimli and Legolas are, Aragorn always takes the cake. And I feel like he is struggling throughout this movie to hold on to hope. First, he doesn't necessarily find the hobbits, even though they've tracked them for 3 days nonstop. Then he goes to Rohan and finds that Uruk-hai are coming to kill them. He's really struggling to hold on to hope and hoping that something will happen and that Gandalf will be able to find aid. And you almost see him falter a little bit towards the end, right before he remembers Gandalf saying he's coming on the fifth day at first light, look to the east. Part of him losing hope is that he's also kind of heartbroken because he believes
Yeah.
that Arwen is going off to the Grey Havens to go off to the Undying Lands, which is essentially elf heaven. She after being convinced by her dad. So he's kind of lost a little hope in his love life too. Talking earlier about the flashbacks, we get a flashback of Aragorn leaving Rivendell in the Fellowship. After that flashback, he's talking with Eowyn, who, by the way, I always get her name mixed up with Arwen sometimes.
Yeah.
They're way too similar. He's talking with Eowyn, and she finds out from the books, people would know this, but in the movies, in theatrical version, we never got this. Aragorn reveals that he's actually 87 years old.
I really like that they talk about that because I knew that was like part of the book of like, yeah, the Dunedain have super long life. I actually looked up how old Aragorn is when he dies. Do you know?
I don't actually.
He's 210. And apparently he dies because he just decides it's time. He gives his son the crown. He lays down in his tomb and he passes on.
That has Aragorn written all over it. Like, I've done my duty.
He's just like, all right, that was enough.
Yep, clocking out now. That's awesome.
Yeah, 210.
But I like how his hope does get a little bit of a bolster, despite Elrond's machinations of getting his daughter to leave Middle Earth because he's worried about her safety. And in the flashback of Aragorn, there's a little bit of what looks to be some sort of contention between Elrond and Aragorn because Elrond knows of the romance and he doesn't want Arwen to stay and suffer with him. So you feel like Elrond has a little bit of contention. Obviously, he doesn't like his daughter's boyfriend. I mean, what dad does at first, right? But Aragorn is rewarded with a little hope because despite Elrond's views on men and on Aragorn, he still decides to send elves to save them. Because he says in the first movie, we should not entrust the future of Middle Earth to men. Men are weak. And yet he does end up having a little bit of grace for them and
Yeah.
sending his own men to help try and save them despite their past failings.
I love the conversation between Gandalf and Aragorn when Gandalf learns how Sam went with Frodo. The happiness on Gandalf's face, and he's just like, I couldn't have planned it better.
Yeah.
He's very much a man in conflict. It feels like he's punishing himself for his ancestors' mistakes.
Right.
He doesn't feel he has any right to claim anything for himself. And he is very much denying himself all throughout this movie. Through the flashbacks, we see that with Arwen. In the present, we see that with Eowyn, and also how he commands certain areas, right? Because he could easily, when he is dealing with the King of Rohan, he could definitely be like, I am the heir of Gondor, like they should roughly be on equal ground, right?
And you see glimpses of that because he does kind of speak very directly to Theoden.
He does speak directly to him and he does stand up to him a little bit, but like he backs down whenever he's challenged.
Right. Because then he does kind of remember his place.
He accepts that as his place, but in reality, he is equal to the King Theoden. It's setting all of that third movie development up for sure. I think also Eowyn, fine in this movie. I like her much better in the next one. A little too much like obsessed with Aragorn.
I mean, so I thought that too. After this watch, I started to think, who wouldn't be obsessed with Aragorn? He's good at literally everything. Okay, he's not crazy like Legolas and Gimli maybe with the kills, but he's good at everything. He's polite. He's kind. He probably doesn't smell too bad, I would imagine. And he literally survives a warg attack and falling off a cliff, getting washed up on a river miles away, and riding by himself ahead of a 10,000 or so strong orc army, and just goes to battle that following night.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't fall in love with that guy?
You ever see those things that are like explain a movie badly and it just like explains it in a really like just technically correct, but like really wrong way?
Right. Yeah.
All I can think is like girl tries to get together with grandfather's friend or something like
yeah.
Grandfather's war buddy.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think her story is a little too focused on Aragorn. Obviously, yeah, he's great. I felt like it didn't really service her character very well. And I think that is handled much better in the next one, but
and I think that was part of some of Tolkien's background too, is he doesn't and I think that this is a feeling that some even modern authors have, is that sometimes it's hard to write the opposite sex, And I think that's why he doesn't have a whole lot of women in his stories.
Especially his time period, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I have heard that he never wanted this, but I feel like it's undeniable that his life in World War One had to influence some of this.
Oh, heavily.
Obviously, like at that time, it's like women were not on the front lines. So
right, and they do make a little bit of a deal about her going into the caves, and Aragorn still telling her, "Hey, this is still an honorable duty. You are still protecting and guiding these people."
Yeah, it's a product of Tolkien's time,
and you can see it further too in the fact that Theoden grabs older men and young boys and outfits them and gets them set for the battle too. I mean, that was something, people were drafted for the war, and it was terrible for everybody. And that scene where the men are walking out of the caves when the soldiers are gathering them up and all the women and the children are crying.
The other thing that made me think about World War One is how they talk about like how Saruman always keeps saying like, oh, this will be the last war, the war to end men or whatever. Like the last war is a terminology that makes me very much think of like World War One.
Right, because wasn't it that one that they called the war to end all wars?
There was something similar to that name for World War One.
I agree with you. It's perfect how they end with Sam's speech, because you start thinking, they're still walking towards Mordor. They're still walking towards their potential doom, and yet you do get this very uplifting, upbeat moment that gives you hope for the next film.
Yeah. The other line from his speech that I love is when he's like, even darkness must pass, a new day will come. When he says that, you're seeing shots of the fight at Helm's Deep and Isengard, and then also in Osgiliath where they are. The filmmaking is just phenomenal, right? There's moments in these movies, like the water fade to Arwen and like the weird glow on people's faces in Fellowship, where I'm like, yeah, this feels very 2000s. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it feels like a product of its time. But there's also plenty of other moments that more than hold up. I have trouble fathoming how you managed to pull this off.
Without a doubt, every single time I watch these movies, whether it be theatrical or extended edition, when the Ents break the dam at Isengard, there's the scene where they're all just standing against the flow of the water.
Oh, and the dude who's on fire.
This one Ent was lit on fire by orcs throwing torches at it, and you just see him run in from off the screen to the left, and he just runs in and dunks his head in the water, and without a fail, it always makes me chuckle.
yeah, definitely. I love how much of a force of nature the Ents are. Do any of the Ents even die in that scene?
No.
Like, even the dude who's on fire just jumps into the water and he's just like, I'm good.
Right.
They are a force of nature. And even how they take over Isengard, they literally break a dam.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, all right, let's just, put our roots down, push up against this water. Everyone else get washed away. Nature itself was destroying Isengard.
Saruman is talking about how industrialism will take over the world, and he starts chopping down Fangorn Forest, and then the Ents rise up, provoked by Merry and Pippin, and you have this dichotomy between nature and industry, or world-altering industry. You see some of this throughout Tolkien's works, and it was another very in your face kind of thing, because Saruman does have a speech just on how he will bring further industry to this world, and they develop a bomb, and all of this kind of stuff. Yeah, it's crazy to see all of that on the screen, and it's not like it's trying to like push a certain message or anything, but it is something that Tolkien wrote into his work. And it's interesting to see that coming out, because at the time, like we talked about already in World War I mean, industry was huge, right? Like everyone had to be producing weapons of war, and he saw how that ravaged the world. Next time we're going to be talking about Rogue One, a Star Wars story.
Yeah, in preparation for the new Andor series, which I have high hopes for.
Yeah.
The trailers have looked phenomenal.
Oh, definitely.
If the show's as good as the trailer, then it's going to give Mandalorian a run for its money.
Which is interesting, because this is the movie that kind of paved the way for stories like The Mandalorian.
That's for next week. Next week, we'll talk about Rogue One.
So that's all for today's episode. Please subscribe, follow, and leave a review on whatever podcasting medium you use. And please check out our YouTube channel for additional content. Join us next week, and thank you for listening to the Ultimate Age of the Geek. So we're kind of new to this podcast thing, but we could not have gotten started without Buzzsprout. They make things so easy, such as telling us what equipment is necessary for a podcaster, even a beginning podcaster like ourselves. They even offer you the ability to blast your podcast out to every major distributor. And right now they're having a promotion that if you sign up to use one of their very cheap plans, you can get a $20 Amazon gift card to go towards maybe equipment. So give Buzzsprout a try today and click the link in our description.